I didn't scream when I saw her in the cage. I forgot how to breathe, like the air itself had turned against me, thick and wrong and heavy in my lungs. And for a moment, I just stood there in the dim light of that warehouse, the kind of place that smelled like cold metal and forgotten decisions, trying to understand how something like this could exist inside a city I controlled down to the last streetlight, down to the last whispered deal. And yet there she was, sitting still inside iron bars. Like she had already accepted that the world had narrowed to four walls and a locked door, her hands resting in her lap, not shaking, not reaching, just still. And that was what unsettled me the most. Not fear, not panic, but the absence of both. Like whatever had happened to her had already taken those things away long before I walked in. I took a slow step forward, my shoes echoing softly against the concrete, the sound too loud in the silence. And her eyes lifted to meet mine, not wide, not pleading, just watching, measuring, like she was deciding whether I was another threat or just another passing shadow. And I realized then that she wasn't waiting to be saved. She wasn't expecting anything at all. And that hit harder than anything I had seen in years, harder than any deal gone wrong or any betrayal whispered behind closed doors, because this wasn't business, this wasn't strategy. This was something personal in a way I couldn't yet explain. I glanced at the lock, heavy steel. Professionally done, not some random act, not chaos. This was planned, deliberate, and my jaw tightened as a familiar feeling crept in. Not anger yet, not fully, but something colder, sharper, the kind of clarity that only came when a line had been crossed. I didn't ask her name, didn't ask what happened, because the answers were already written in the way she didn't move when I got closer, in the way her shoulders stayed relaxed like resistance had been trained out of her. I crouched just enough to be level with her eyes, keeping my distance, keeping my hands where she could see them. And for the first time since I walked in, her gaze shifted, just slightly, a flicker of something uncertain, not trust, not yet, but something that hadn't been there before. And I spoke quietly, my voice steady in a space that didn't deserve calm. You're not supposed to be here. The words felt inadequate the second they left my mouth, because nothing about this was supposed to exist, not under my watch, not in my city. I reached for the lock, but stopped before touching it, something in me resisting the instinct to act too fast, because I understood now that opening the door wasn't enough, not if she didn't believe it would stay open. And behind me, I heard footsteps, measured, familiar, the kind of sound that belonged to someone who thought they still had control, and I didn't turn right away, because in that moment, everything had already changed. I just didn't know how far it was going to go. I did not have to turn around to know who it was. The rhythm of those footsteps had been part of my life for years, steady, confident, like the ground itself would adjust to make way. Marcus Hale never rushed, he never needed to. And that was exactly what made something inside my chest tighten, because this place, this situation, it carried his signature in ways I could not ignore. I kept my eyes on her for a second longer before I finally stood, slowly, deliberately, not wanting to startle her, not wanting to become just another sudden movement in a world that had clearly taken too much from her already. Then I turned, and there he was, leaning casually against the metal doorway like this was just another late-night inspection. His jacket perfectly tailored, his expression calm, almost amused, like he had been expecting me to show up eventually. "You are early," he said, his voice easy, familiar, the same tone he used when we were discussing shipments or territory lines over expensive whiskey. And for a moment, the contrast between that tone and what was behind me made everything feel unreal, like two separate worlds had collided and refused to make sense together. I did not answer right away. I just looked at him, searching for something, hesitation, guilt, anything that would suggest this was not exactly what it looked like. But Marcus only watched me with that same composed patience, as if he believed explanation was optional, as if this did not require one, and that was when the clarity settled in, cold and absolute. I took a step toward him, my voice low, controlled. "Tell me this is not yours." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Years of trust compressed into a single moment. Marcus tilted his head slightly, like he was considering how honest he felt like being. Then he gave a small shrug, the kind that dismissed consequences before they even arrived. "It is complicated," he said, and something inside me went still, not broken, not explosive, just still. Because complicated was never the word you used when you were innocent. I let out a slow breath, glancing back over my shoulder for a fraction of a second, just enough to confirm she was still there, still watching, still silent. And I realized then that whatever happened next was not just about him and me. It was about the line that had been crossed the moment she was put in that cage. I turned back to Marcus, closing the distance between us until we stood just a few feet apart, close enough that there was no room left for misunderstanding. You used my network, I said quietly. Not a question, not anymore. His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, more like recognition. We built this together, he replied, like that justified it, like shared history could rewrite what was happening in that room. I shook my head once, slow, controlled. We built rules, I said, and for the first time, there was a flicker in his eyes, brief but real, something that acknowledged he knew exactly which rule I meant. The silence stretched between us, thick, charged, but not loud, never loud, because this was not the kind of moment that needed raised voices. This was the kind that decided everything in the quietest way possible. Marcus straightened slightly, his posture shifting from casual to something more deliberate. You are making this bigger than it is, he said, and I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so far from reality it felt absurd. I took another step forward, stopping just short of him, my voice dropping even lower. You put someone in a cage, I said, each word measured, undeniable. In my city. The last part lingered, not louder, just heavier. Marcus held my gaze, unflinching, but I could see it now. The calculation, the realization that this was no longer a conversation he could steer, and behind me, I heard the faintest sound, not movement, not quite, but presence, a reminder that she was still there, still listening, still waiting without expecting anything. And that was what decided it for me. Not loyalty, not history, not the years we had stood side by side, but the simple fact that some lines, once crossed, erased everything that came before. I exhaled slowly, the decision settling into place with a certainty that left no room for doubt. And when I spoke again, my voice was calm, almost quiet, but there was nothing uncertain about it. This ends now. I did not raise my voice after that. I did not need to, because the silence that followed carried more weight than any threat ever could, and Marcus knew it. I could see it in the way his shoulders squared, in the way his expression shifted from casual certainty to something more guarded, like he was recalculating a situation he had already assumed was under control. You are serious, he said, not quite a question, more like a realization that arrived a second too late, and I held his gaze, without blinking, because there was nothing left to negotiate, nothing left to reinterpret. The line had been crossed the moment he decided she was something that could be contained, managed, reduced to an object behind metal bars, and I did not allow that. Not here, not ever. I reached into my pocket slowly, not for anything dramatic, just my phone, the movement deliberate, controlled, and Marcus watched it like it mattered. Like every small action now carried consequence. I pressed a single call, did not look away from him as it connected. Send 2 men to my location, I said quietly, giving the address without hesitation. Then I ended the call before any questions could be asked, because there were no questions left to answer. Marcus exhaled through his nose, a faint shake of his head following, like he was disappointed in me, not the other way around. You are choosing a stranger over loyalty, he said, and for a second, I almost believed he actually thought that was the truth. I tilted my head slightly, studying him the way I used to study problems that needed solving. I am choosing the line you ignored, I replied, and that was the difference, the thing he failed to understand. This was never about her versus him. It was about what kind of man I was willing to be when no one was watching, and right now, she was watching. Even if she did not believe it mattered, I stepped past him then, not pushing, not rushing, just moving with purpose, because I was done standing still. The air felt different as I crossed back toward the cage, heavier before, clearer now. Like a decision had shifted something unseen, I stopped a few feet, away from her again, keeping the same distance as before, not invading, not assuming. And for a moment, neither of us spoke. Her eyes followed me carefully, tracking every movement, every breath, like she was trying to understand what had changed, and I realized she had heard everything, not just the words, but the weight behind them. I crouched slightly again, lowering myself to her level without making it feel like a move. Just a presence, steady and deliberate. "My name is Adrian," I said, keeping my voice even, calm, the kind of tone you use when you are trying not to break something fragile. And her expression shifted just enough to notice, not trust, not yet, but recognition that I was offering something real, not a command, not an order, just a name. She did not respond, but her fingers moved slightly, the smallest motion, like her body was remembering how to react after being still for too long. I glanced at the lock again, then back at her, making sure she saw the hesitation in me, the choice. "I am going to open this," I said, not reaching yet. "But you decide what happens after." The words hung between us, unfamiliar in a place like this, where decisions were usually taken, not given. And for the first time, her eyes flickered with something that looked dangerously close to disbelief, like the idea itself did not fit inside her understanding of how things worked anymore. Behind me, I could hear Marcus shift his weight, the faint sound of movement that used to mean backup, strategy, partnership. Now it just sounded distant, irrelevant. I did not turn, did not acknowledge it, because my focus was right in front of me, on the person who had been treated like she did not have a choice. I reached forward slowly then, giving her time to pull back if she wanted to, giving her space to reject it if she needed to. And when my hand finally closed around the cold metal of the lock, I paused, just for a second, long enough for her to see that I was not rushing this, that whatever came next would not be forced. And in that moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath again, waiting to see if she would believe me. I turned the key slowly, not because the lock was difficult, but because I needed her to see every second of it, needed her to understand that nothing about this was rushed or forced. The metal clicked with a quiet, final sound that seemed louder than it should have been, and for a moment I did not move, my hand still resting against the cold surface as if letting the reality settle into the space between us. The door was no longer holding her, but that did not mean she was free yet, not in the way that mattered. I leaned back slightly, creating space, stepping away from the opening so she would not feel cornered, so she would not feel like she had to move because I expected it. And that was when I noticed it, the smallest shift in her posture, a hesitation that ran deeper than fear, like her body did not quite remember how to respond to an open door, like stillness had become safer than choice. I kept my voice low, steady, the same tone I would use if I was trying to calm something fragile in my hands. "You can stay where you are," I said, not as permission, but as reassurance. "Or you can step out. It is your decision." The words felt simple, but I could see the way they landed, unfamiliar, almost confusing, and she blinked once, slow, like she was processing something she had not been offered in a long time. Choice, real choice, not an illusion of it. Behind me, the warehouse remained quiet, the distant hum of fluorescent lights the only sound filling the space, and for once, I was grateful for the silence, because it gave her room to think, room to breathe, room to decide without pressure closing in around her. I watched as her fingers curled slightly against her knees, a small movement, but it carried weight, like the first step of something larger. She shifted forward just an inch, then stopped again, her eyes lifting to mine as if searching for a sign that this was real, that I would not change my mind, that the door would not suddenly close again the moment she trusted it. And I understood that look. Even if I had never been in her place, I understood what it meant to question reality when it shifted too quickly. I gave a small nod, not urging, not pushing, just confirming what I had already said without repeating it. And that seemed to be enough, because slowly, carefully, she moved again, one foot sliding forward, then the other, each motion deliberate, cautious, like she was stepping onto uncertain ground that could disappear beneath her at any second. I did not move toward her, did not reach out, even when she came closer to the edge of the open door, because this moment belonged to her, not to me. And when she finally crossed that threshold, when both feet touched the concrete outside the cage, something shifted in the air, subtle but undeniable, like a line had been erased and redrawn in a way that could not be undone. She stood there for a second, not walking away, not retreating, just standing, as if waiting for something to happen next. And I realized she was still expecting the world to correct itself, to take this back, to remind her that freedom was temporary, conditional. I shook my head slightly, more to myself than to her, then spoke again. Softer this time. No one is putting you back in there, I said, and the certainty in my voice was not for effect. It was not a promise I might reconsider later. It was a fact, something unchangeable, and for the first time, I saw it, a crack in the stillness she had been holding on to. Not a full reaction, not relief, but something smaller, more fragile, like the beginning of belief. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed faintly from the entrance behind us, the men I had called arriving. Right on time. But I did not turn immediately, because my focus was still on her, on the way she stood there, caught between what had been done to her and what she was allowed to choose next, and I knew then that this was not where it ended. This was only the moment everything started to change. The sound of the door opening echoed behind me, measured footsteps entering the space with the kind of discipline that did not ask questions unless invited. I did not need to look to know who it was. They would stop at the edge, wait for instruction, because that was how this worked, structure, order, lines that were never meant to be crossed, and yet everything about tonight had already broken that pattern. I finally turned slightly, just enough to acknowledge them without shifting my position. Fully away from her. Stay there, I said quietly, not raising my voice, not adding emphasis, but they understood immediately, their movement halting without hesitation, and when I looked back at her, I saw the way her eyes flicked toward them for a fraction of a second, the instinct to track every new presence, every potential threat, still sharp, still necessary in her world. I kept my stance relaxed, not blocking her path, not directing her, just there, steady, a point she could measure against if she needed to. No one here will touch you, I said, and I meant it in the most literal sense, not reassurance for comfort, but a boundary drawn in real time. And something in her expression shifted again, subtle, almost imperceptible, like she was testing the weight of that statement against everything she had learned before this moment. I could feel Marcus behind me, not moving closer, but not leaving either, his presence lingering like a question that had already been answered but refused to disappear. I did not give him my attention, not anymore, because whatever he had been to me before did not belong in this moment, and I was not going to let him redefine it. I took a slow breath, then reached for my jacket, slipping it off in one controlled motion, not sudden, not abrupt, making sure she could see every movement, every intention, and I held it out slightly, not stepping closer, not placing it on her, just offering it in the space between us. It might be cold, I said, the words simple, almost ordinary, but that was the point. Normal, something that existed outside of whatever she had been through. Something that did not demand anything in return. She hesitated, her gaze moving from the jacket to my face, like she was trying to understand if there was a condition hidden in the gesture, a price she could not yet see. I did not move, did not fill the silence, because this was not about convincing her. This was about giving her the time to decide, and after a few seconds that stretched longer than they should have, her hand lifted, slowly, cautiously, stopping just short of the fabric before finally taking it, her fingers brushing against it like she expected it to disappear, and when it did not, when nothing changed except the fact that she was holding something that belonged to her now, I saw it again, that small fracture in the wall she had built, not broken, not gone, but no longer untouched. I nodded once, a quiet acknowledgement, then stepped back half a step, widening the space around her even more. There is a car outside, I said, keeping my tone even. It can take you anywhere you want to go. I let the words settle, then added, just as calmly, or nowhere if you are not ready. Because I understood that leaving was not always the same as being safe, that distance did not automatically mean freedom, and I wanted her to know that the choice was not a single direction she had to follow immediately. Her grip tightened slightly on the jacket, her shoulders shifting as if she was testing what it felt like to stand without something holding her in place, and for the first time, she took a full step forward on her own, not out of the cage, not away from me, just forward, into a space that was hers to move through, and that was when I realized something I had not expected. She was not looking at the exit, she was looking at me, not with fear, not with trust, but with a question she had not spoken yet, and I held that gaze, steady, unflinching, because whatever answer she was searching for, I knew it was not something I could say out loud. It was something she would have to see for herself in what I chose to do next. She did not look away, and that was the first real answer she gave me. not in words, not in movement, but in the way her eyes held mine like she was searching for something she had not found in a long time, something steady, something that did not shift depending on what someone wanted from her. And I understood that look more than I expected to, because in my world, certainty was the only currency that mattered, and right now, she was trying to decide if I was something she could rely on or just another variable she needed to survive. I exhaled slowly, keeping my posture relaxed, not closing the distance, not stepping back either, just holding the space. Exactly where it was. You do not have to decide anything right now, I said quietly, because I could see it, the pressure building behind her silence, the expectation that she would have to choose quickly before the opportunity disappeared, and I was not going to let that happen. Not this time. Her fingers tightened slightly around the fabric of the jacket, like she was anchoring herself to something real, something that did not disappear the moment she reached for it. And then, finally, she spoke, her voice soft, rough at the edges like it had not been used enough. Why? The word was simple, but it carried everything: confusion, suspicion, disbelief, and something deeper that she had not fully let surface yet. I did not answer immediately, not because I did not have one, but because I knew the wrong answer would sound like a lie, and she would recognize it instantly. I let a second pass, then another, before I spoke, my voice even, honest in a way I rarely allowed myself to be. Because this should not exist, I said, gesturing slightly toward the cage behind her, not with anger, not with force, just acknowledgement. Not here. I added, and she watched me carefully, like she was measuring the truth in what I said against everything she had experienced. I could see it in the way her shoulders shifted, the tension not gone, but changing, adjusting, as if something inside her was reconsidering what it believed about the world around her. Behind me, the men remained still, silent, waiting, and Marcus had not spoken again, his presence fading into something distant, irrelevant to the moment unfolding in front of me. I took a small step to the side, opening the path toward the exit completely, making it clear without saying it that there was nothing in her way. You can leave, I said, not as a command, not even as encouragement, just as fact. And this time, she looked toward the door, really looked, like she was seeing it for the first time, the open space, the possibility, the absence of barriers, and yet she did not move immediately, her gaze returning to me after a second, and I saw it then, clearer than before. She was not afraid of leaving. She was unsure of what came after. The outside world was not automatically safe just because the cage was open, and I respected that. I understood it. If you want, I continued, my tone just as steady. You can come with me. The words were simple, but they shifted the weight of the moment in a different direction. Not just escape, but protection. Not just distance, but something more controlled, something she could rely on. I held her gaze, not pushing, not expecting, just offering, and for a second, everything else faded. The warehouse, the men, the past few minutes that had already changed too much, it all narrowed down to that single choice in front of her. And when she finally moved again, it was not toward the door, it was toward me. One step, then another, slow, cautious, but intentional. And I did not reach out, did not close the distance for her, because this was still her decision, her movement, her control. And when she stopped just a few feet away, closer than before, but not too close, I saw it clearly for the first time. Not fear, not trust, but something in between, something fragile and new. And I realized then that this was not about saving her, not in the way people like to imagine. This was about giving her something she had not been allowed to have, the ability to choose what happened next. And for the first time since I walked into that warehouse, I felt something shift inside me too, something quiet, something certain, because whatever came after this moment, I knew one thing without question. She was not walking back into a world that would treat her like she did not matter. She stopped just close enough that I could see the details I had missed before, the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the way her breathing was steady but too controlled, like she had learned to keep everything inside where it could not be used against her. And for a second, neither of us moved. The space between us no longer about distance, but about something else, something quieter, something that felt like the edge of a decision neither of us had expected to make tonight. I kept my hands at my sides, open, visible, not giving her any reason to doubt what she had already stepped toward. and I spoke carefully. We will walk out together. Not as an order, not even as reassurance, just a statement of how this would happen if she chose to keep moving forward. Her eyes flickered slightly at the word together, like it carried weight she was not used to accepting, and I did not push it further, because I could see she was already processing more than enough. Behind us, the warehouse felt smaller now, not physically, but in the way it no longer held the same control it had just minutes ago. The cage was still there. The door still open, but it had lost something, its authority, its ability to define what came next, and I turned slightly, angling my body toward the exit without stepping away from her, giving her a direction without forcing her into it. The car is about 30 feet outside that door, I said, keeping my tone even, grounding the moment in something real, something measurable, something that existed beyond uncertainty. She glanced toward the exit again, then back at me, and I saw it. The hesitation that came not from fear of the door, but from what leaving meant, because once she stepped outside, there would be no returning to the version of this moment where she had not yet decided. And that kind of choice was never simple. I gave a small nod, not to hurry her, but to acknowledge that I understood, that she was allowed to take this at her own pace. And after a second that stretched longer than it should have, she moved again, one step forward, then another, aligning herself with me rather than behind or ahead, and that told me more than any words could have. She was not following. She was choosing to stand beside me, and I adjusted my pace to match hers without thinking, keeping it slow, steady, controlled, so she would never feel like she was being led somewhere she did not agree to go. We started toward the exit together, the sound of our footsteps soft against the concrete, measured, almost synchronized, and for the first time since I had entered that building, the air felt different, less suffocating, less confined, like the space itself was losing its hold over what happened inside it. I could feel the eyes of the men behind us, waiting, watching, but none of them moved, none of them spoke, because they understood what this moment was, even if they could not name it. And as we reached the doorway, the cooler air from outside brushed against us, subtle but noticeable, carrying the scent of the city, distant traffic, something alive beyond these walls. I stepped just outside first, not to lead, but to make sure the space was clear, then shifted slightly to the side, leaving room for her to step out on her own terms. And when she did, when she crossed that threshold fully, leaving the warehouse behind without looking back, I knew there was no undoing it. The line had been crossed in a way that could not be reversed. I glanced at her briefly, not lingering, just enough to confirm what I already sensed. She was still tense, still uncertain, but she had not stopped, and that mattered more than anything else. The car waited a short distance away, engine running, door already open, but I did not gesture toward it immediately. I did not assume. Instead, I looked at her again, giving her one more moment, one more choice. This is where you decide what happens next, I said quietly, and for a second, everything stilled again. The city, the night, the past few minutes that had changed too much too fast, all of it narrowing down to her, standing there in the open air, no walls, no bars, no one holding her in place. And I realized then that whatever she chose, whether she walked into that car or turned away from it, it would not be because she had no other option. It would be because she finally did. She did not answer right away, and I did not expect her to, because this was not the kind of decision anyone made quickly, not after everything she had just walked away from. The night air wrapped around us, cooler than inside, carrying the distant sound of traffic and something almost ordinary, like the world had continued without noticing what had just happened inside that building. And for a moment, she just stood there, her fingers still gripping the edge of the jacket, her eyes scanning the space in front of her like she was mapping exits, distances, possibilities, and I let her. I gave her the silence she needed, because filling it would only take something away from her that she had just begun to reclaim. Control. I kept my posture neutral, not turning away, not stepping closer, just present, a fixed point she could measure against if she needed to. And after a few seconds, she took a slow breath, deeper than before, like she was testing what it felt like to breathe without restriction. And then she moved, not toward the street, not away from everything, but toward the car, one step at a time, steady, deliberate, and I followed half a step behind, not leading, not directing, just there, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to leave her space untouched. The driver stood beside the open door, silent, waiting, his posture respectful, his eyes lowered just enough to show he understood the situation without needing it explained. And as we approached, she slowed again, her gaze shifting from the car to me, like she was asking a question she still could not say out loud. I met her eyes, holding that moment without breaking it. "You can get in," I said quietly, then added, just as calmly, "or you can walk away." Because I needed her to hear it again, needed her to understand that this was still her choice, that nothing about this had changed just because we were closer to the next step. She watched me for a second longer, searching, measuring, and then, without another word, she turned back to the car, her hand lifting slowly to the door frame, pausing there for a fraction of a second before she stepped inside. The movement small, but it carried more weight than anything else that had happened tonight. Because it was hers, entirely hers, I closed the distance then, but only enough to reach the door, resting my hand against it without shutting it immediately, giving her one last moment to change her mind if she needed to. But she did not move, did not pull back, she simply sat there, the jacket wrapped around her shoulders now, her hands resting in her lap again, but not the same as before, not still in the same way. There was something different in the way she held herself, something that had shifted just enough to matter. I nodded once, more to myself than to her, then closed the door gently, the sound soft, controlled, nothing abrupt, nothing that could be mistaken for something else. I stepped back as the driver moved to his position, the engine already running, ready to take her anywhere she wanted to go. And for a second, I stood there, watching the reflection of the city lights on the car window, trying to understand why this felt different from every other decision I had made. Why this moment stayed with me in a way that others never did. The car did not move right away, and I realized it was waiting, not for me, but for her instruction, her direction, her choice of where this would go next. And I felt something settle into place. Something quiet but unshakable, because for the first time in a long time, control was not about power, it was about restraint, about knowing when to step back instead of forward. And as the car finally began to move, slowly at first, then merging into the rhythm of the city beyond, I did not follow, I did not call out. I just watched it disappear into the night, knowing that whatever came next, whether she chose to return or to disappear completely, it would not be because she had no other option, it would be because she had finally been given one. I thought that would be the end of it, the kind of moment that closes cleanly, like a door that does not need to be opened again. But the truth is, nothing about that night stayed where it happened. It followed me, quiet at first, almost unnoticeable, then louder in ways I could not ignore. I went back inside the warehouse after the car disappeared, not because I needed to, but because unfinished things have a way of lingering if you let them. And Marcus was still there, exactly where I had left him, standing in the same place like time had not moved for him the way it had for the rest of us. He looked at me when I stepped back in, his expression unreadable. But there was something different now, not confusion, not even anger, just a kind of understanding that had come too late to matter. "You let her go," he said, and it was not disbelief, it was recognition, like he finally saw the version of me that had been there all along but never challenged him until now. I walked past him without stopping, my gaze briefly catching the open cage in the corner, the door still hanging wide, empty in a way that felt louder than when it had been occupied. "She was never mine to keep," I replied, and the words settled into the space between us with a weight that neither of us tried to move. He exhaled slowly, a faint shake of his head following. "That is where you are wrong," he said, but there was no conviction behind it anymore. Just habit, just the echo of a mindset that no longer held the same ground. I did not argue, because this was not something that could be explained to someone who had already decided how the world worked. Instead, I turned toward the exit again, because there was nothing left for me here, not in this place, not in what it represented. The men followed without being told, their silence heavier than usual, like they understood that something had shifted even if they could not define it. Outside, the city looked exactly the same as it always did, lights stretching across the skyline, cars moving through intersections like nothing had changed. But I knew better. I could feel it in the way my thoughts refused to settle, in the way that single moment kept replaying, not the discovery, not the confrontation, But the look in her eyes when she realized the door was open and no one was going to close it again. I got into my own car without saying a word, the engine starting with a low hum that grounded me just enough to focus, but not enough to silence everything else. The drive back felt longer than usual, every streetlight passing in a rhythm that matched. The steady repetition of one question I could not ignore. Where did she go? Not because I needed to control it, not because I expected anything in return, but because for the first time, I cared about the answer in a way that did not fit into anything I had built my life around. I told myself it did not matter, that she had made her choice and that was enough. That was how it was supposed to work. But that thought did not stay where I placed it. It kept shifting, changing, becoming something else entirely, something that made me realize that control had never been about holding on to everything. It had been about knowing when to let something go without breaking it in the process. I reached my building just after midnight, the familiar structure rising in front of me like it always had, solid, unchanging. But as I stepped out of the car, I paused for a second. The night air cooler here, quieter, and I understood something I had not expected to. That the world I had built was not as complete as I thought it was, that there were things it could not account for, choices it could not predict, and people it could not define, and she was one of them. I went inside without looking back, the doors closing behind me with a soft finality, but it did not feel like an ending. Not really, because some stories do not end when someone walks away. They begin the moment they are given the chance to choose where they go next. And as I stood there in the quiet of my own space, I realized that whatever happened after this, whether our paths crossed again or never did, one thing would remain true. She had walked out of that cage on her own, and that meant the world would never be able to put her back in one again.